The first time I was on stage, I was 4 years old, and my mother put me in a musical conservatory, and I was playing piano, and somebody discovered me and liked my face and thought I'd be good for a commercial. So it was U.S. Rubber, as a matter of fact, and this was in South Bend, Indiana. And so what happened? It was supposed to be a Life magazine advertisement come to life on a stage, and so I was. It was a little play actually, at the end of which they took a picture. So I was modeling, and I modeled a cowboy suit on stage with the 6 guns, and they said I was cute. I don't remember a thing about it, but I guess I yawned all the way through it. It was past my bedtime. So that was my first big break. And all I remember was I really loved being on stage, and I think that's when the bug bit me. Mm-hmm. Once I had the guitar, my repertoire changed. You know, I went from the 3 Billy Goats Gruff to Gene Vincent, overnight. And so my early influences, of course, were the first generation rock and rollers. Jerry Lee Lewis, Buddy Holly, Gene Vincent, Elvis, of course. And, basically anything I could play. I taught myself how to play the guitar. Till this day, I still don't know how to play the guitar properly. I play an open E tuning, which was seemed very logical to me at the time. Playing minor chords is a little rough, but I can basically do everything with one finger and a thumb. I basically did not play the guitar to play lead solos. I played the guitar to accompany my singing. We moved from Monroe, Wisconsin to Niles, Michigan. In the first year that I was in junior high, a fellow came up to me and said, "Why don't we try out for the variety show?" He was a drummer, and he knew I played guitar. And I said, "Sure, why not?" And so we got a piano player and a trumpet player, and tried out for the junior high school variety show. It was an amazing experience that we could actually be accepted that way, playing rock and roll. I think we played Lonesome Town by Ricky Nelson. I think that's the song we played. Well, I suppose the biggest career move happened for me the year I was 14. I was in 8th grade. I think I was still 13 or 14, and I got a job at the local record shop, the Spin-It record shop, selling records after school and on weekends. And I found out that I could not only learn the trade papers and learn the retail side of the record business, which I dearly loved, but I could also promote my band out of the same store. So the lady's name was Edith Frushi. We called her Dickie, and she was great. She was very hip, middle-aged lady who sort of took me in under her wing, gave me a job, and thought it was cool that I had this band. So she would allow me all kinds of liberties, and I was able to talk with the jukebox guy and the disc jockeys when they would come in, because in this little town, the record shop was the center of all the musical activity. So one day, one of the distributors walked in from the One Stops out of Chicago, little one stop called Singer One Stop. And these were sort of the capillaries of the music business. And I got to talking with the local distributor, whose name was Bud Ryder. And he told me they had a little studio over in Hastings, Michigan, and a label called Northway Sound Records. And they basically were doing a lot of country acts, but if I'd like to come over, I could record my band. Well, I went over and took the band over there, and we recorded a song called Judy and Long Ponytail, which was a cover of the Fireballs record. And put it out locally, and it went, number one in 6 square blocks. And but we had a record that we could actually put on the jukeboxes, and we just thought that was great. Hanky Panky came out on Snap Records, and this time the record was played actually all over the state and down into Indiana. We couldn't get on Chicago radio, and we couldn't get on Detroit radio because they were major markets, but we had a lot of area in between. So this was a big deal for us. And so the record, of course, though, died anyway because we couldn't go any further than that, but our cocoon had expanded. When Hanky Panky came out, we figured we needed a name change. So we changed our name to the Shondells. I don't know, it was nothing profound, just a name that I came up with in study hall, I think. It sounded right, and back then anything with an E-L-L-S on the end was fair game. So it was the Shondells, and Hanky Panky came out and expanded our territory a little bit, but, it also died. Jack Douglas had been trying to get a hold of me, and I'd been getting all kinds of frantic messages that he didn't know my telephone number and was trying to get a hold of me. And finally he called and said, Tommy, you're not going to believe this. You just sit there for 10 minutes. Somebody from Pittsburgh's going to call you. And I received a call about 10 minutes later from the distributor in Pittsburgh, from Fenway, distributor in Pittsburgh, who informed me that this record of Hanky Panky, one copy had ended up in the city of Pittsburgh, and they bootlegged it and sold 80,000 records in 10 days, and we were sitting at #1. And I'll never forget, I just, it's like, you see in the movies where the stop action, my world just stopped right there, and I remember that moment like it was last week. I literally went from being absolutely nobody to having the #1 record, but in Pittsburgh only. But it was a major market, and it meant we were going to have a regional breakout, and we had a chance at making it. So the guys that I was playing with didn't want to do it. They didn't believe it was going to happen. They were sick of the road. They, leave me alone. So I went by myself and literally had to start from scratch. I had to grab a band in Pittsburgh, and the group was playing as the Raconteurs in a nightclub that I happened to walk into. I said, "Hey, you want to be the Shondells?" And that was it. And 2 weeks later, we signed a recording contract in New York with Roulette Records. The head of Roulette Records was a fellow by the name of Morris Levy, who was a rather notorious character who, well, the only way I can describe him is he was sort of a musical Al Capone. We went to Roulette as well as a number of other companies and got a yes from everybody with Hanky Panky. We shopped the record to Kama Sutra, to Epic, to Columbia, to Laurie at the time, and a lot of the independent labels. We got a yes from everybody. Ironically, the following morning, they all called back and said, "Listen, we got to pass. We got a call from Morris Levy at Roulette, and we're going to pass." So apparently, Morris had gone and called all these people up one by one and said, "This is my record." And that was it. We were on Roulette. That's exactly how it happened. And the fellow who was shopping the deal, his name is Chuck Rubin, said, "Listen, Tommy, they want to put you out front. So what do you want to call yourself?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I mean, you Tommy Jackson, Tony Jones, Jimmy James. What do you want to call yourself?" And I said, "Well, why do I have to do this?" He said, "Well, the group isn't enough. They want to put you out front." So I said, "Well, okay." I wanted to keep my initials. I wanted to keep my first name, and the first J that popped into my head was James, and I said, "James." And he said, "Okay, so Tommy James, that's it?" And I said, "Yeah, Tommy James." And that's literally how I got my name. In the time it took to light a cigarette, and that's about as much thought as I gave it. So we went in the studio in late '66 over at Allegro Sound Studios, where they worked. It was in the basement of the 1650 Broadway building, and started playing with the arrangement. And it was there that we came up with the doom 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 doom, the eighth notes, just playing around with the thing. and we did a demo with this new arrangement, which was considerably faster and more to the point than what they had. And 3 weeks later, we were in the studio. As a matter of fact, it was Christmas Eve, 1966, recording I Think We're Alone Now. What a great Christmas present that was. Well, very quickly, I realized that my life was basically living from one single to the next, like stringing pearls. I can tell you that that was a very rough way to live, because the pressure was always on, and realistically, I was doing this thing alone. I mean, I was making the decisions on, what the single was, what I would get excited about, and as much help as I was getting from Bo and Richie, and they were tremendous, and they were producers as well, and they taught me how to produce. I still felt a tremendous burden to get those singles in the can, because that was the gasoline that ran the engine. So we came immediately with Mirage, which followed up I Think We're Alone Now. In fact, the chord structure of Mirage is I Think We're Alone Now backwards. We accidentally put the tape on upside down one night and said, "Hey, that's great. What is that? Let's write a song around those chords." It was just too. It sounds like one of those stories that was made up by a press agent, but it was absolutely the truth. Mirage was I Think We're Alone Now backwards. So the next single after that was Getting Together, which scored for us, and was another gold record. So we were putting them together pretty fast, but life was getting very hectic, and honestly, there was no slowing down that freight train. I don't think many people realize the changes that happened in the record business in 1968, mostly because of the Sgt. Pepper album in 1967. First of all, we literally overnight went from 4-track multi-track systems to 24-track, which meant you had a lot more space to fill up, and you had to be interesting. And the second thing that happened was that FM radio really came into its own that year. There was a mass extinction that year of artists. Before 1968, you had one group of artists. After 1968, there was a totally a new batch of artists. And they were all album-oriented, and that became really the dividing line. Was the end of the singles market as being the dominant force in rock and roll. We couldn't come up with a name. We were looking for, a Sloopy, a Boney Maroney, and everything sounded so stupid. We just basically put it off to the last minute. So now it's the night before I'm supposed to do the vocals. We had the track and no title. And so Richie Cordell and I were up at my apartment in New York trying to come up with a name. And finally, I just threw my guitar down. I went out on my terrace and I looked up and I see Mutual of New York, M-O-N-Y, Mutual of New York Insurance Company building, with the $sign in the middle of the O, and they gave you the time and the weather, And I said, Moni. Boy, does that sound great. I said, Richie, come out here. And we looked at it and said, that's perfect, Moni. The 68 was a tough year, and we just sort of made up our mind that if we had the chance, we'd get involved in some way. And lo and behold, I got a call, Roulette got a call from Hubert Humphrey's office. And this was after Robert Kennedy had been assassinated, but before the convention.